Namaste, dog.
Namaste, Ham.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. It's a little rainy day here in New Hampshire, but I'm fine.
Welcome to Nepali Root podcast.
Thank you.
People from all over the world might be listening and watching us through YouTube and different podcast channel, including Apple, Google, Spotify, and many more.
Wow.
So, so let me start with where do you live nowadays? And if you would like to share, what do you do?
Well, I live, excuse me, in central New Hampshire, about an hour and a half by car north of Boston, and live in a very small rural community. Uh, Really, it's an old farming village, if you know, although nobody farms anymore here. And it's got a good heavy winter, a lot of snow, um, but we enjoy it here.
Wonderful. I always love farm and farming. In fact, a couple of months ago, we were trying to purchase a farm
Uh-huh.
in either in North Carolina or in Maryland. It didn't happen because of high interest rate.
Yeah,
Hopefully, one day, my dream, either here in the United States or in Nepal, to have a big farm.
yeah.
Big means, uh, maybe 10 bigha in Nepal. Not so big,
Yeah.
but big. Yeah.
Well, I'm no longer working. I've been retired for 17 years now, but I continue to put a lot of time in to nonprofit work as a volunteer. And the thing I'm most involved in right now is trying to make the funding for the public schools in New Hampshire more equal. And we have some communities where they don't have the tax base, they have poor schools, the students don't do well because of that. And we have other communities that are very wealthy on the lakes where there are a lot of summer homes, a lot of people paying those low taxes, but they're getting the kids that live there are getting good education. So I'm involved with and helped create this nonprofit that's now suing the state of New Hampshire under the state's constitution to provide more funds for the public schools. So that keeps me busy.
Wonderful. Can you please share with me when I read about your little bio that you sent to me? You went to Nepal in 1968 and you taught science and English at Durbar High School in Kathmandu. So I would like to know uh, how was Nepal at that time? It's like before I was born, I want to know.
Yeah.
Can you please share some of your experiences?
Well, my experience was living in the Kathmandu Valley. And while other volunteers lived out in the hills and in the Terai, there were a few of us who were in the valley. So my experience was not one of living in a village. It was living in Kathmandu. And of course, at that time, the valley was still an agricultural um, an agricultural paradise. The soil was very productive, and by far, 85% of the land in the valley was farming. That's no longer the case, obviously. It's all built up now. And at the time, Kathmandu's population, the city, might have been 200,000. I doubt that it was more than that. And um, Kathmandu and Patan and Bhaktapur were all separate communities. Now they're all sort of merged together with all the development. So it was the total population of Nepal when I was there, I think was 12 million. Now it's almost 3 times that, I think. So there's been a huge change, and some of that is very positive. The economics have changed considerably, and one way I note that is my old photos of Nepal when I was there. Even at Durbar High School in Kathmandu, very few of the kids had shoes.
Wow.
And that was indicative, and their clothing was homemade for many of them. Certainly in the villages outside of the valley, those would be the same sort of things you'd see that have changed considerably, that indicate how the economy has changed. And that's all very positive. On the other hand, there are environmental issues that have occurred that, you know, I did go back to Nepal in 2017 and flew to Pokhara. And from the 4 or 5 days we were in Pokhara, and this was in May, long before the monsoon, we never saw the Himalayas.
Mm.
I mean, that would have never happened back in the 1960s. Those mountains, a clear day in the morning, they were, you know, all out and visible. So the environmental issues, now some of that has to do with smoke coming from India, but that's not all it is. And then the built environment, unfortunately, the wonderful architecture in the Kathmandu Valley, the Newar architecture, but elsewhere, the Gurung homes, and, you know, I can think of different places. Those are all being replaced by what I'd call the sort of international cinder block and cement style. And you can no longer say that's a Nepali house. That same house could be in Nairobi, Kenya, or it could be in Sao Paulo, Brazil. You know, it's so I think I'm just sort of reflecting on both the positive economic changes, people's lives are better, and the negative changes.
Wow. When I saw some of the photographs, again, the link you sent to me, I was really, really surprised when I still need to check all the photographs, by the way.
Yeah.
And especially I checked closely the photographs that were taken in Surkhet, my birth district, and I could not believe, dogs. I could, you know, it was so empty. The hut, I mean, all the houses,
Yeah.
and so the land, all the natural sceneries, everything. So
I should tell you about those photographs. What happened is I had my own photographs, maybe 200 or so, and I decided to digitize them. And a couple Nepali friends of mine said, you know, those are historic photographs.
yes.
And I thought, yeah, you know, but mine were almost all in Kathmandu, and everybody takes pictures in Kathmandu. And there's a history of a couple families who had been doing photography in Kathmandu. But the Peace Corps volunteers who had gone out to the villages, many of them took cameras, and they were the first people in their village or small town with a camera. So when some friends said mine were sort of historic, I thought, well, those that other volunteers at the same time with the photos that they took would be even more historic, showing, you know, Elam and what it was like, or Hile, or Dankuda over in the east, you know, or Baglung, or wherever. So my wife and I decided we would see if we could collect these old photos from volunteers. And we had the names of about, I think it was maybe around 600 volunteers who had served from the beginning of Peace Corps in Nepal, 1962 to the 1975. We had to put an end year on it. And so we contacted the volunteers and we got them all who were willing to provide photos or who had photos to sign an agreement putting their photos in the public domain so people can use them without, reference. There's no copyright. And so they signed it, and then we decided we would digitize their photos because they were all old slides or black and white prints or something. So with more than 100 contributors, that collection now has more than 20,000 photos. And they're from all over the country, from Bajang in Chainpur and Bajang Jilla in the far west. And they've seen a lot of use. When we got each of the contributors to write a description for the photo about where it was, names of people, if they could remember in the photos, they've been used in a lot of different ways in Nepal. Some of the photos recently were used. There was the Occupy Tundikel movement in Kathmandu, and we had the old photos of the Tundikel before all of the buildings had encroached around it, and those were all blown up and used as posters. So it's a collection that was fun to put together, but like your view of it was, oh wow, that's before I was born. We've had people contact us because one volunteer took a picture in Chiti in Lamjung Jilla of each of the classes in the school, all the kids lined up outside. And so we get emails saying, that's my grandmother when she was in second grade. So, it's been a lot of fun.
Yes. And also, I realized that, first of all, thank you so much for your hard work, for contributing such a wonderful piece of art, I would say, and such a great collection. And especially the people like me who want to know something more about history, who are more interested in photography, we can benefit a lot. And many Nepalese people, I think, can benefit. I'm already started planning to use, how can I make good use of these photographs?
Well, good. And I contributed complete sets to, I think it's 9 organizations in Nepal. The Nepal Photo Library, I'm trying to think of all the different ones, a couple museums. So we're trying to make sure that those that are on the website that we have, there are full sets elsewhere that can be used. People can go in. I know that there was a museum that was being proposed in Namche for a Sherpa museum, and they took all the photos that we had of Namche, and they have them now on some sort of computer screen in Namche. That's the kind of use that we would hope is made of those old photos.
Yes, indeed, yes. And also, I was just wondering, I was maybe curious a bit more. Did you have, did any of the contributor, I would say, took videos or as well?
No, there were no video cameras back at that time.
Oh, I see.
and in fact, the fact that we have the color photos, there was no place to develop color film in Nepal at the time. So what had to happen was the volunteers had to send their film, the photos they had taken, they had to send it back to the US to be developed. Maybe their parents or somebody had them. So just getting color photos was difficult.
Yeah, in fact, yes. I'm asking this because some of the videos I saw on YouTube, I'm not sure if that exactly that time, maybe after some time. There is one video about Nepal taken by, I guess, he's from Australia, if Australia or Austria, I'm not quite sure. It's in 1970s. I was born in 1970s, so and wow, Kathmandu was in it is very for me. So it make me, I would say, wonder. Wow, Kathmandu was like that before
Yeah, yeah.
in video format, So
Yeah,
but
well, there were large video cameras, and I know there are films. Sunil Ulak, who lives in Pokhara, he's
Mhm.
collected many videos that were made by news organizations, specialists who brought cameras in to Nepal. But they were this size, big cameras,
Mhm.
and very expensive. So Peace
Yeah.
Corps volunteers didn't have them, that's for sure.
Yeah. But anyway, the photographs are great contribution again, I would say. Yeah, that's yeah. Thank you so much for sharing about this photograph and how you collected and how other people contributed too. Um, you said that you went to Nepal in 2017. This is, I think, your most recent trip, I guess. And Doug, I'm just curious if you do you have any plan to go back again anytime soon?
Yeah, I don't have any specific plans. I would like to at some time. Um, I have some friends there who are my age, and I'd like to see them one more time. Um, I will say, we went back, and my wife and I went back in 2017 because Sunil Ulak in Pokhara was opening an exhibition of our photographs, and he wanted us to come to help open the exhibition. And the American ambassador in Kathmandu wanted to exhibit these photographs. So we went to open the photographic exhibition. There was a specific purpose. And this next time, I think if I had a purpose, it would just be to see some old friends before I or they die. I don't have a specific plan, but sometime in the next year or so, yeah, maybe.
Wonderful. And you are also the co-founder of New Era. Can
Yeah.
you please tell me, this is the first nonprofit organization, and can you please tell me a little bit more about like why you founded and it's in
Yeah,
2 years and what it is doing now?
they actually had the 50th anniversary of the organization. They had a book written with the whole history. But briefly, the history was after I spent 2 years in the Peace Corps, USAID, U.S. Agency for International Development, contacted me and asked if I would be willing to serve as a science education advisor to the Ministry of Education. And the then director of USAID was very interested in hiring Peace Corps volunteers to fill those roles in health and in education, partly because we had lived there a couple of years. We could, at the time at least, speak Nepali, read Nepali. And when USAID hired people from the US, some university, to go to Nepal for 2 years, they really didn't know anything about the local culture. So we were hired. I was hired. Mel Goldman was hired. Peter Cross was hired. A number of us were hired and worked for USAID. And what I discovered in working for USAID was that many of the Nepali employees who worked for them had skills and interests that went far beyond what USAID was letting them do. So, and so USAID had this rule. I would, as a Peace Corps volunteer, I'd ride my bike everywhere. So my bicycle was my transportation. In USAID, no, you have to take the Jeep and the driver will take you where you need to go. So it was like having a chauffeur, and my conversations with the drivers, I realized that was a good job for them because it was paying them okay, but they were capable of doing a lot more for the country than driving a bunch of foreigners around. And so 3 of us who worked for USAID, Peter Cross, Mel Goldman, and I, decided what we needed to do was create an organization outside of the government that young Nepalis with good education could find a way to help work for the development of the country. So I left Nepal and went back to Washington, D.C., and we created New Era. And that was in 1971. And by 72, 73, we started to staff up. We hired an ex-volunteer for a few months. And then there was a fellow who had been a Peace Corps volunteer, also a staff member at Peace Corps, who was then dean at Oberlin College. And we hired him to go back to Nepal and be the initial director there. And so that organization started with 3 or 4 Americans. We hired a number of Nepalis. We had any number of projects. And after 4 or 5 years, the Nepali staff took over, the last American left, and the organization has been run as a Nepal nonprofit organization since then. There were difficulties along the way because when we started, Nepal had no law related to nonprofit organizations. There was no way to exist. And so it was an American organization incorporated in the US. And then when we finally got an organization incorporated in Nepal, we transferred all the assets and it's run well ever since. I think they have maybe 35, 40 full-time permanent employees working on research projects in various fields. And when they have a big project, which typically involves field work throughout the country, they'll hire another 100 people to work and do field work. So it's a big organization, and it was nice when I went back in 2017 to visit with them and see what they've achieved over the decades since I left it.
Wow, wonderful. So, as you mentioned a while ago, there were like the students who were at Durbar High School, they didn't have shoes. There might be so many things that may have surprised you. So I would like to know what surprised you most, Doug?
When I first went to Nepal?
Yes, that's what my...
Yeah, I don't think I was surprised by much because Peace Corps provided us 3 months of training in the US before we went. And that training involved 5 or 6 Nepalis who had come to the US to do training for volunteers. And we lived in what was really a poor migrant labor farming camp in California. We were taught Nepali language sufficient enough for us to start teaching in the schools. And we had gone through cultural training. So I think when we actually landed in Kathmandu first day, I really wasn't surprised by much. And I attribute that to the good job the training had done. If I had gone cold with no training, just here you are, it would have been very startling. to go from, a middle class, well-developed community to a community that had caste issues to deal with, which I would have stumbled all over myself about that. So the training was really very good.
What did you like most in Nepal?
When I sort of sit and reflect back on it, I think the thing that I really liked the most was the friendliness of everybody. The people were friendly no matter where. And the kids in the classroom as you're teaching, they were very inquisitive, very willing to listen to my poor Nepali, and that friendliness sticks with me. And there's also a welcoming attitude. I did go on some treks, and I went trek from Pokhara up to Annapurna, and then back around and over to Lamjung, and from Lamjung to Gorkha, and all of that. And one of the things that surprised me, which is such a cultural difference in that sense, was it would be evening, and I'd be finishing the walk that I was doing that day, coming into some village, and it was never a problem finding somebody to say, yeah, come stay at our house, we'll feed you. I mean, can you imagine that happening in this country? Just some stranger walking up to your door, and you're saying, oh, come in. And I mean, that was just overwhelming friendliness. Of course, there was curiosity. What's this crazy white guy doing here in our village? And so they did want to learn why I was there. But they were just, everybody throughout the country that I experienced was extremely friendly. And that's, beside all the other things, the environment and everything, that friendliness and welcoming attitude is just top for me.
You traveled to, let's say, far west or midwest part of Nepal, though?
I did go to Chainpur in Bajang. Now that was a difficult experience. That was when I was working for USAID, and so there was they had opened an airport, an airstrip in Chainpur, and we were going to there was a high school there, Satyabadi High School, and we were going to take out science teaching equipment to that school in the plane. So we flew. There was a pilot, the co-pilot, and me and my government counterpart, Bhaira Prasad Upadhyay. There were four of us in the plane. We fly to Jumla, and we land in Jumla, and then we go out from Jumla and we fly west to Bajang, and we couldn't get down as the plane, the valley was so steep to get down to Bajang. The plane couldn't circle tightly enough to get down. Nobody had landed there before, so they just were discovering this. So they flew then down to the Terai, and we had to figure out which river we could see, and we would fly up the valley of the river all the way up to Chainpur, which we did at a low altitude, up the river valley. And when we got to Chainpur, the plane came down, and we had an accident. The plane crashed.
Wow.
And what happened is there was a rice paddy just before the beginning of the airstrip, and the plane's rear wheel hit the rice paddy wall, stripped the wheel off, and the plane flipped up, and luckily it didn't go over. It came back down. All of the village, all of the students at the high school were out lining up this airstrip on the right side of the airstrip. the plane, no longer under any control by the pilot, luckily went off the airstrip to the left. If it had gone off the airstrip to the right, we would have hit, 10, 20 people. So the plane had this wheel taken off. We got out. We were all okay. Nobody was hurt. But the plane couldn't take off with any real ability because it was lacking this rear wheel. It was dragging its tail. So the pilots told us they wouldn't take us unless we signed an agreement relieving them of any responsibility if the plane crashed again. So we said, Bhaira Prasad and I said, no, we're not going to sign the agreement. We'll stay here. So we stayed in Chainpur and Mizang for a few days. And then eventually we had to walk, I can't remember where we walk south for a couple days before we got down to the Terai and eventually got back. So that was the furthest west I went. And my vacation time in Nepal, as a volunteer and when I was working for USAID, was always on mountain climbing trips. So twice in Langtang, trying to climb Langtang 2, and once out of Pokhara going up to Annapurna Amphitheater and trying to climb Hume Chuli, which had never been climbed before. And all 3 climbing trips were unsuccessful. So, I never made it to the top.
There was one plane. Yes, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to speak in Nepali. Yes, when you had that plane, I would say almost could have many casualties. How, like, when they could not land, how was your feeling? Were you scared a lot, or like, oh wow, this is new, first time they're landing?
Well, no, it was clear that was an accident. And what was the scariest was actually when we were going around trying to go from up here down to land. When we flew around and the plane was at an angle, going around, there's a water buffalo over there 10 feet away. We're so close to that side of the valley. And then as it swings around the other side, geez, there's 3 kids standing there on this footpath looking at us. And we couldn't get the circle tighter. That was scary. Coming up the river valley was not scary until bang, we hit and it tore the wheel off. So that Airstrip was then closed. They never flew into that airstrip again. But Chainpur has a new airstrip, but it's further away than the one they had built, hoping to bring in this equipment.
I see. And I think probably you walked from Chainpur to Dhangadi, maybe, or in the south side. There are
Yeah, it was south. I don't remember at this point where we went.
How many days it took?
It could have been Dhangadi. Yeah.
So how many days it took for you to you walk on foot? So
yeah, it was a couple days.
And how was I'm a bit curious. How was when you were traveling on the way? Perhaps no hotels at that time. So travel might have been very difficult, I guess. How was it?
Well, everything was by foot. And at the time that I was then I went to Pokhara, the highway there hadn't been opened. You either had to walk to Pokhara or fly. So everybody was walking, and there are a lot of porters. By the way, that was one of the things that has changed considerably with all the roads now into the hills. While some of those roads have problems associated with them because they're poorly constructed and all that, it does mean that supplies get brought in, and the number of porters that used to be necessary to bring supplies into any hill village, any town in the hills, has gone down. And that's really good because porters, as I recall, the information we had at the time, the lifespan of porters was very low. They would die because of the labor that they went through or infections that they would get. So the fact that now there's motorized transport to bring in goods to the little shops in hill towns is a real plus. But at the time, everybody was walking. So it was, it was very easy to ask directions. Which path here do I go on to go where? And as I said, people were just so friendly. You'd sit at a chodara, take your pack off, sit, and some porters would come in, that put their load down, and then you just have a conversation about what they're doing. Everybody was friendly, but it was all foot traffic.
Yeah, one more thing. So maybe on the way back to Dangari, and were there any hotels, or where did you stay, in somebody's house? Or
Oh no, yeah. That was true everywhere. You just stay. You walk into the village. I remember going into Gandruk, which is now kind of a tourist place. But at the time, there were no tourists. So we go in and somebody said, oh yeah, you can come here, sleep on my porch, and so there were four of us. So I slept on the porch on the left side, somebody slept on the right side, and they cooked up rice and sag and, dal bhat for us. And it wasn't that they were running a hotel, but they were willing to have a foreigner come in and eat and sleep at their house.
Yes. Wow. And did you pay for it, or how was it?
We often would pay a little bit for the food. I don't recall ever paying for staying. At the time, it was just friendliness. And I understand it's a good thing that there are now these little hotels being built up, that brings money into those communities from outside, and that's helpful economically in those communities. But at the time, that didn't exist.
Yeah, in now, Doug, you may have already known about it. I was in Nepal about a year ago, and I stayed about 1 year there, crisscrossing Nepal from west to the east.
Yeah.
I still want to go to the north side. That I could not. I didn't travel much. My next trip would be, I want to crisscross Nepal in the northern side. They call it Pahadi Rajmarg or something. They call it, and I want to do that. They call hilly highway. Something like that. Madhya Pahadi, I say.
There's the Trans-Himalayan Trail that's being put together, and Mac Odell, who was a Peace Corps volunteer in Group 1, has been responsible for trying to get that to happen. It goes through, the Limbu areas, Tamang areas, up in the northern hills, and but it's all for walking, not for
Yeah. One of my dream or my hobby or my passion is to travel, especially northern part of India in Nepal. I really want to do as soon as possible. I want to do it at some point. So a wonderful experience you had, and what did you like least in Nepal, Doug, if any?
Well, I'll tell you, my job, the second year as a volunteer, was working in the Ministry of Education, reforming the science curriculum, writing new teachers' guides, things like that. And then when I worked for USAID, I was also working with the Education Ministry. And both of those jobs involved me in the bureaucracy. And that was very frustrating. Now, it's true that bureaucracy is frustrating everywhere, not just in Nepal, but it was first you'd meet with the undersecretary, and then you'd have to meet with the joint secretary, and then the secretary. And if you're lucky, you get to meet with the minister. In my case, for part of the time I was working there, the Minister of Education was Harka Guru. And I don't know if you know Harka, he died a few years ago in a helicopter crash.
I do know.
Wonderful. Okay, he was wonderful, and he and I got along, we were friends. But down below the minister level were all the bureaucrats, and I'd have to prepare, decision memos, and I won't use the names of some of the folk who were in those positions. They're probably, long gone, but nevertheless, I won't use their names. But there were times when it was clear they were looking for something in it for themselves. And of course, we couldn't do anything that would sort of speed things along. Bakshish was not, something that somebody at USAID or Peace Corps would be willing to deal with. So if the question of what did I like least, it was because of the kind of job I had. It was the dealing with inside the bureaucracy. Mm. Now, very few Peace Corps volunteers ever had that experience. They were out in the hills, they were in the Terai, they weren't dealing with bureaucrats. And so my experience in that way is limited to only a few other friends of mine who had similar kind of jobs working in one of the ministries, health ministry or education ministry.
Wow. That's very insightful, I think. So what would you do differently if you had a chance to go back in time and volunteer in Nepal as a younger self, or maybe similar, maybe same thing, maybe different?
I think what I just said sort of alludes to that. Since I was in the Kathmandu Valley, I was there for 5 years altogether, and I was always living in the Kathmandu Valley. If I had a chance to go back, I would like to have told the people who made the posting decisions. So here comes a group of 20 new volunteers, and they have these possible posts. I would have said to them, don't put me in the valley, put me out someplace, either in the Terai or in the hills, in a small town with a nice school where I can teach and get to know that village, that town. That's what I think I would do if I went back. I'd say, no, don't put me in Kathmandu. Put me out where the real Nepal is.
Wow, that's very powerful, I think. Yes, and the reason behind it, very powerful. So this question is, I think, a little personal for me, but as I said, I was born in Karnali. Karnali is the least developed area of Nepal. Karnali province now, they call it. And I don't know if you are comfortable with answering this. I've just asked. There are so many things needs to be done in Nepal. Some part, especially in Karnali region, Doug, I would say education in terms of education, in terms of infrastructure, in many areas, it's far behind. It's still, I feel very sad, to see when people don't have clothes, they don't have enough food to eat. I was visiting from my birth place to the capital of Surkhet. Nagar, and I saw people, some children didn't have clothes on their body. So it was, so if any suggestion or in your opinion, what could Nepal do? There could be so many things, but at least if you want to share some tips or.
Yeah, the idea in the Constitution, the most recent Constitution that changed to a federal system with the regional provinces, you would hope that would give the regional governments would be able to begin to deal with the issues within their region. But, and I say this even though some of my friends are involved in all the political parties in Nepal, I'm not sure that the federal system is really working. That the central government still seems to want to control everything. Now, that may be an incorrect perception, but that's my perception. I read the Kathmandu Post pretty much daily, but I think there are governance issues that are not good right now, and that I did go back. I'll relate another thing that I did. I did go back to Nepal it was 1994. This was shortly after Jan Andalan Ek, and I had been, after I came back from Nepal some years later, I was elected to the New Hampshire state legislature, and I served 4 terms there, and I ended up being the chair of a committee that was responsible for the budgeting process and all. So what happened is I was invited to come back to Nepal to work with the parliament and the parties in the parliament in 1994 about how to set up a budget process. How could they, now that they really had the ability to set a national budget, not just the king's budget, how were they going to do this? And what I discovered, and that was to me, it was a real big mistake for the future of Nepal. And it's still being debated, as I understand it. They decided, among other things, that each member of the parliament would be given an amount of money that member of parliament could use for project in his or her district. When you give elected officials money that they can spread in their district for what they want to do, you make it very difficult for an opponent who doesn't have the same resources to say, so what you're doing is you're providing all the elected members of parliament a sure way to get back into parliament. And I think that contributes to the fact that the existing parties, I'll accuse all of them just to be fair, the existing parties in Nepal would rather keep the power in Kathmandu than let it move out into the regions. And I think that works against Karnali.
True. So true. So true. Thank you so much. Let me say something in Nepali, and I know that you understand in many, at least.
Hola.
तपाईले भन्नुभएको थियो तपाईको नाम कृष्ण राज थियो नेपालमा भनेर. Any message to Nepali friend from Krishna Raj?
म भोलि पर्सि म फेरि आउँछु.
Very nice. So do you want to add anything, Doug, that I didn't ask you or I may have missed?
No, I think this has been a very nice interview. Thank you for inviting me.
People who love Nepal and who want to know about Nepal, they will benefit from our conversation. And thank you so much for your time and your contribution for Nepal and Nepalese. Namaste.
Okay, namaskar.